They came to Old Wick on a tide that smelt of iron and old storms, a slow black swell that lifted the longships like breath and set them down with whispers against shingle and rib bone. The island rose from the sea as a thing dredged from some elder deep. Slate cliffs furred with brine and salt lichen, the long sweep of the strand, and above it the stark white curve of Naga's ribs, the ancient sea dragon's bones half embedded in the turf, fixed forever into a crown for the wind. The day had not yet woken fully. Pale light gathered in seams along cloud banks, and gulls hung like torn flags in the hush. Men spoke low. Even the ironborn, who loved the clatter and shout, softened their voices here. There were places where the sea itself seemed to listen. Theon Greyjoy stepped onto stone still wet with night and brine. The shingle rolled under his boots and hissed with each shift of weight. The air tasted of rust. He paused, and the tide breathed in, and the tide breathed out, and for a moment the rhythm matched the beat in his chest, an accounting the sea had always kept of him. He was thinner than when he last stood on Old Wick. There was not much of him that had not been taken by cold or blade or the steady, cruel bite of another man's will. He did not show the worst of it. Asha had seen and said nothing, which was mercy. "Brother," Asha said behind him, her voice as frank as wind off a cliff face. "You'll not be staying there all day, will you? The rocks don't bend any easier for brooding." He turned. Asha wore seawool beneath her mail and a dark coat cut to move with a deck's heave. Her hair was bound with a narrow strip of sailcloth, and 3 small gold krakens winked at her ear like sly fish. Her mouth had that crooked, mocking quirk to it that the Ironborn had learned to love or to fear. The reader had told Theon once that a captain needed 2 smiles, one for taking good counsel and one for refusing bad. Asha had both, and knives besides. "Rocks bend for no one," Theon said. The words came out softer than he meant, as if they needed to pass through water on their way to air. "It's men who break. Some do." Asha's eyes held him. "In letting it pass, we have some time yet. Aeron means to drown 100 lads before he'll let the sun rise proper. He calls it holy. I call it wet." She set off along the strand with him, the bones above them a white scythe against the sky. Naga's ribs arced from the slope like a forest of tusk, old whale ivory but older, a memory the sea had left to dry. Men had pegged banners between the bones. Black krakens of House Greyjoy, green hands of Goodbrother, tridents and black cormorants, and the knotwork devices of the minor houses, whose names Theon could summon as one summons an old song and finds he has forgotten the second verse. The air clacked with rigging high on masts. Oars rattled in their locks. Fires the color of damp copper smoldered in pits along the strand, where men warmed their hands and argued in the brief quiet before argument became duty. "The first voices will be fools," Asha said. "They always are. Let them spend themselves. The Damfair will wear that rapture of his and shout that only a man who's tasted salt enough to drown in it may rule. Victarion will ask for a war he can win with his hands. Euron will ask for a war no one can win at all, and he'll smile while he does it. You'll stand with me at my shoulder. Ben, Dalwa." Theon listened to the names settle around him like old nets. Aeron the Damfair, with his wet hair and his eyes cleared by the dark. Victarion, a battering ram of a man, whose honor had always been a sharpened boast. Euron, the brother with a blue smile and a patch where an eye had learned too much. To walk among the ribs was to walk inside the family's own cage. Theon had left this place once with laughter hard in his throat and easy in his hands, riding south to be a wolf among wolves and return a kraken. He had returned in pieces. Here was the stone against which all the pieces knocked and clicked and could not settle. A woman knelt in the shallows to their right, with her boy's head under the water and both her hands in his hair, her lips moving. The water folded over him and broke. The boy came up gasping, coughing, a thin salt wail that made 3 men glance over and smile, because they had made that same animal sound once and lived. Aeron stood knee-deep beyond them, his beard matted with seawater, his arms dark to the elbow as he lifted another lad by the shoulders and pressed him down. He looked thinner than Theon remembered, all sinew and wind, a piece of rope left too long in the weather. "He will ask for the old way," Theon said. "He always does. The old way is a fine cloak if you wear it over real coin and counted harvests," Asha said. "When Balin was well and the rocks did not move, it was something to sing about. But I mean to count ships and men and grain. I mean to count suckling pigs and the wool from Harlaw and the iron we can smelt when the winds go wrong. I mean to count winters so we do not die of honor. Do you hear me, brother? I will make numbers of us, and I will still set us to sea." He heard her. He had not known before that he had longed to hear that sort of sense spoken in the Iron Islands. In Pike, his father had stood with the sea in his mouth and listened only for the word "Nobo do ni." No kings but those who drown. No bread but what you tear from another man's hand. No mercy that could not be worn like a blade. Theon had loved that no for a time, because to love it was to belong somewhere. But the no had eaten him at last. Asha's voice sounded like a yes, still iron, but hammered to shape. They climbed the slope between the ribs and came to where the ground leveled into a low green, with old stone seats set between the bones. A rough timber throne waited beneath the tallest rib, piled over with bladders of wine and tarred ropes and a driftwood crown lying on a board like a tide gift. Men trickled into the bowl of the hill, captains with oarsmen at their heels, minor lords with salt wives trailing like questions, and thralls with their heads low and their eyes careful, carrying baskets or rope or water. The long ships beached below faced the sea like hounds, eager and still. Every silent thing, tide pools in the rocks, the bones, the ropes twitching in the wind, held a listening. The reader found them there, wrapped in a cloak patched at the elbows, his hair gone thin and white, and his brow a shelf of lines. His bookish eyes took in details the way a miser took in coin, and put them in their proper places. "Nephew," he said. And it took Theon a second to recall that Roderick Harlaw was uncle by the old bent root of kinship, that the Ironborn could recite with their eyes shut and their mouths full of ale. "Niece," thought, "the Damfair is already drunk on the god. It suits him. Victarion is sharpening a silence into something he thinks is speech. Euron has sent a boy with a chest and another with a horn." "Bah." "A horn," Asha said, dry. "A thing with seams of gold and more blasphemy than music, if what the maesters write about Valyria bears any truth." The reader said, "He means pageantry and spectacle. It is a carnival trick, and men will delight when they ought to be wary. The chest has coins from 10 cities, bright and broad as the moon's eye, meant to make fools of those who have never left a lee shore. Will you stand for me?" Asha asked him. "I will stand for all that can be built, and I see more timber in you than I see in your uncles," the reader said. "Euron reads too, but he reads the wrong books. Victarion has read none. Aeron reads only the sea and mispronounces it on purpose. I will stand." "A horn," Theon said, tasting the word the way men taste unknown fish. The reader's mouth tilted before it quieted. Theon had the sense that the old man was measuring him, as a shipwright measures a keel, to test what weight it could bear and where it would warp. "You keep to my shoulder," Asha said, eyes flicking to his face and away again. "You say nothing until I pull words out of you. When you speak, make them few and as sharp as rigging knives." She left him then to greet lords and captains, and the bowl slowly filled. Sound rose, a murmur like surf drawing along a strand. Theon stood very still and let it pass through him, until some of the tremor stopped in his hands. He could feel the old stiffness in his fingers that was not stiff at all, but an absence. And he folded his hands at his waist and made them look sane. Men watched him, because men always had. Some looked away, ashamed. One young oarsman with a scar like a fishhook across his cheek stared in frank curiosity, caught Theon's eyes and flinched as if from a wave slap. Theon did not look away. Scars spoke to each other easier than whole skin. The Damfair called the moot with a voice that wound through the ribs like a rope cast true, and every voice stilled as if someone had stepped hard upon a deck, and the ship had the good grace to listen. Aeron named the dead king. Aeron named the drowned god. Aeron named the old way, and the sea answered him, throwing a cold salt breeze across their faces, so that some men cried out, and others only closed their eyes because it was a thing they had wanted. "The sea gives," Aeron cried. "The sea takes. We take. We pay the iron price. Who will rule us? Who will call us to oar and storm? Who will be salt and iron and speak for our Lord beneath the waves?" "Victarion!" someone shouted. "Victarion! Victarion!" "Drum," another. Dunstan Drum, with red rain in his fist. A boy's voice piping, reckless and eager. "Euron!" Names tumbled across the grass. Theon felt them pass him like the wash of small waves. Slap, 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 and then the first of the captains pushed forward, and the shout roped itself into order like a sail hauled home. Sigfrid's silver hair had the wind's tang in his old voice, and 3 daughters behind him, as fierce as cats. He spoke of winters weathered, of ships held together by tar and stubbornness, of suns drowned and songs sung. Dunstan Drum's mouth bared his teeth like a dog. He spoke of taking and keeping, and he lifted red rain and made it sing lines into the air, and the fool boys roared at the music of a blade that had always preferred Southron blood. Victarion had nothing of song in him. He wore iron and silence, and only at the last did he shove words into the world with both hands, as if they were heavy, and those words were war, and those words were reaving, and those words were the old way, in a voice that had seldom built anything finer than a pile of skulls. Men cheered. They loved skulls in the Iron Islands. They loved anything that looked like defiance, and did not require thinking about weather or grain. Euron took his time. His ship arrived when the sun had lifted its lid and smudged the sky with a pale fire. Silence slipped into the strand like a young thing that did not yet know how to frighten the older ones. Euron came ashore with a stride that said he already owned every bootprint and every pebble, and a smile under the black patch that seemed to promise that the world was only a jest told for his delight. Men made a space for him, as men always did for clever monsters. Behind him came 2 thralls burdened under the weight of a chest that clicked with coins as a pail clicks with water, and another thrall who carried something long and unwrapped. "My lords," Euron said, and made the word into a toy. "My reavers, my people. You want a king? I will give you empires. The world is wood, and we are the knives." Nah. He threw back the cloth, and the horn lay in the air between them. A thing that looked too much like a spine to be a comfort. Banded with gold that caught the day, and hurled it in pieces into the eyes of men who had not seen such craft since someone's older cousin had brought home a small green swan carved from jade, and every child had hated him for it. The horn's surface was choked with marks that were not letters in any tongue the islands owned. Theon watched Asha watch the horn and saw calculation behind her calm. He wondered if she measured cost the way he did now. Not in coin or blood, but in small pieces of self surrendered to a whim, until a man was nothing but a collection of surrenders that could be carried in a sack. Euron had the horn blown. The sound that wrenched from it was too large for the bowl, too large for the island, a moan that had in it iron and a memory of fire and the feeling of standing on a high place when you had not meant to climb and looking down to find there were no ladders. Men covered their ears, and boys laughed to prove nothing had shaken in them, and 3 gulls fell out of the air like scraps of white paper torn away. The thrall who had blown the horn dropped to a knee, eyes rimmed red, his mouth bleeding a little, as if the note had gone out of him through places it ought not. "You want the dragons," Euron said quietly, and a hush took the name as if it were a small flame and men feared to blow on it and put it out. "I will bring them. I have sailed east and west, and up into the sky in my dreams, and down into the world's dregs in my waking. I will bring us such a prize as no island has held since the sea rose, and the world will kneel. Give me a crown." Mensand. He could spin words into rope, and knot that around a man's throat. He could take all the old hunger, the Ironborn's, Theon's, anyone's, and pluck it like a harp. Theon felt the tug of it, the ache. He was a boy again in Winterfell's yard, looking at a great gray beast, and thinking if he could only catch a piece of that strength and keep it, everything would mean itself again. Asha stepped forward into the place Euron had left with his words, and did not try to sing as he had sung or shout as Victarion had shouted. She did not bring a horn or a chest, though behind her men stood who had known her since she could push a skiff into surf with one thin shoulder and laugh when the sea tried to take her under. "I cannot promise you dragons," she said, and her voice carried in its plainness because it was the first true thing said that morning. "I will promise you ships. I will promise you men to row them and men to fight on their decks who have eaten well because we planned for a winter we might not see. I will promise you raids sighted where the harvests are heavy and the watch is light. I will promise you harbors that we can hold. I will promise you girls who do not starve when their captains are 3 years at sea, and boys who know their fathers' names. I will promise you that if the world tries to make a mock of us, we will choose when to be mocked and make a mock of them in turn. Give me a crown, and I will bring you home." Then, her words did not catch light and blaze. They rooted. Theon could feel it happen, a small shift in the feet of men on turf, in the way heads tilted and stayed. He glanced at the reader and saw satisfaction as mild as a man who has brought a chess piece to the proper square. Aeron lifted his hands to the sky and called upon the god to choose. He took up the driftwood crown in both hands, water streaming from its soaked reeds and tar-dark knots. He had the rapture on him, and his voice was deep enough that one could imagine the sea gave it back. "By the old way," Aeron cried, "by salt and stone and storm. Who will have this crown?" "Victarion." The name came like a drum. "Victarion. Euron." The name came like a knife. "Drum." "Asha." Younger voices, eager, not sure whether they would be foolish or brave. Theon felt it in him change. Up to that moment he had been carried, a thing the sea held and turned. He had thought to keep his hands folded and his mouth closed, and never give anyone the chance to take anything from him he meant to keep. Asha's plain words had entered him, and found an old shelf in him, and set themselves there. She had spoken of men coming home. He was tired of being lost. He stepped forward without meaning to. Or he meant it. He could not after say which it had been, only that the act happened, and he was in it and no other. The bowl had the silence that comes when a gull drops a shell from a great height, and men all look up as one. He stood below Aeron. The crown's drip marking cold spots down the priest's wrists and below the highest rib. And he lifted his face so that every man who had ever called him fool or boy or lordling might see him. "I am Theon of House Greyjoy," he said, and his voice did not break. The sound of it surprised him, deepened by all the salt he had swallowed. "I am Balin's son, born on pike. I have paid what I had with iron and with pain. I name Asha my queen." It was as if he had set a flake of flint against steel. Sparks jumped. Men pulled breath. Someone laughed, quick and high and delighted. And someone else swore like a man who had slipped and was about to fall a very long way. Theon did not look anywhere but at Aeron. The sea had washed most of the man's face away, left it with planes and angles that belonged to rocks and ropes. But there was still a brother in there who remembered another child standing on a pier and daring a wave to knock him off. "Boy," Aeron said softly, "the god chooses. You do not." "The god chooses by the sea's mouth and men's," Theon said. And he hated that he had a tremor in him that wanted to turn the words to pleading and beat the tremor down. "Choose her. She is our best." Asha did not move. That, more than anything, gave Theon his steadiness back. He had leaped, and she would not snatch at him and make him look a fool. Euron smiled, and behind the smile something opened its eye, and it was blue. Victarion's hand flexed near his sword hilt and did not take it up, because even he remembered where he stood, and Aeron's knuckles whitened on the wet reeds of the crown. "This is not the wolf's yard," Euron said pleasantly. "No broken boy makes kings here." Theon turned his head very slightly, enough to show the scarred line of his cheek, and the place where 2 teeth had gone, and the way his jaw set in the face that was his after the unmaking. "No," he said. "This is not a yard. This is a shore. We are salt, not dogs. I know what we are. Name her." A sound rose then, not a shout, but the wave before one. It came from the portion of the crowd that had always watched Asha with something between fear and fondness. It came from the men of Harlaw, who loved a thought too much to let it drown. It came even from some good brothers whose sisters had found more mercy in Asha's crew then in their husbands' hands. The reader lifted his old voice and put it to work, not to shout down anyone, but to give the first wave height. Asha, he said. Asha Greyjoy. Asha, spattered here and there. Asha. Again more. Theon stood very straight and did not look to his sister, and did not let his mouth shape thanks. He listened to the shore gathering itself. Aeron's eyes were not the eyes of any brother now. They were the sea's, patient and ruthless. He heard the name. He heard other names layered under it, the way waves break and break again on a headland. He looked at Euron, who had the smile that could not be bothered to touch the rest of his face, and at Victarion, who had the sorrow men have in them when an axe is not permitted to sing, and at Theon, who had nothing left to lose that could be made visible, and at Asha, who had not asked for this in words. Asha Greyjoy, Aeron said at last, softly, as if he were receiving instruction from somewhere deeper than the ribs. His hands lifted. The driftwood crown dripped on his wrists and along the lines of his fingers. The wind crossed the bowl and died. He placed the crown into Theon's hands as if passing a weight that men carry together or not, at all. The shock of it bit cold, and woke something warmer under Theon's sternum, like an ember remembering flame. He turned. He walked down 2 steps to where Asha stood, and held himself not to smile, or let fear show in his fingers. He lifted the crown and set it on his sister's brow. The reeds left a wet track in her hair. She did not flinch. For a heartbeat, the island drew in breath through a million tiny mouths. What is dead may never die, Asha said. Her voice did not seek grandeur. It sought truth and set a hand on its shoulder, but rises again. Harder and stronger. The answer came from 1,000 throats, automatic and fierce, as if men had been waiting their whole lives to shout it, so that someone else would hear and answer. They shouted, and the shout spilled over the bowl's lip and ran down to the sea and out over the ships. The gulls took it up and made a ragged song of it. Theon let the sound move through the hollows inside him and packed them tight with something that, if it was not joy, was its severe cousin. And then the other voices came, the ones that had been waiting to claw. Euron raised a hand no higher than to touch a brim, and smiled a degree wider. So, he said, and it sounded like a coin turned in finger and thumb. A queen, then, will you have us tie ribbons to the oars? Shall we learn to sew? Victarion's booming disdain came like a cudgel. A woman has no place on the seastone chair. She has had a place on a deck since she was small enough to hide in a coil of rope. The reader answered mildly. A chair is only a chair. The sea makes the law. It is no respecter of cods. Laughter broke out in a ragged gust, because mockery is a language ironborn speak too easily for their own good, and some of the anger lost its teeth. Asha lifted a hand, and men who had never obeyed anyone willingly quieted, because they were curious what she would say. You want a war you can win with your hands, uncle, she said to Victarion. And the word uncle landed like a weighted net, not insult, not honor, a naming. There are wars like that. I will give you those. You want the world to kneel, Euron. I will not give you that. Men do not kneel to krakens when they are far from water. They will drown us on dry land if we let you take us there. I will take the Reach and the Shield Islands, not because they make the bards sing, but because they feed us. I will send raiders to the manor where the guards grow fat on wine. I will keep what we can hold, and when we cannot hold, I will let go with my hands open so we do not break our fingers. I will make harbors with stone and rope. I will leave you battle enough to keep your axes bright, but I will not spend us on your dream. Man? Euron's smile did not falter, but the eye under the patch seemed to narrow, as if some small thought had found its angle. You will be very sensible, he said. A queen of barns. I will be a queen of ships, Asha said, and of the men on them. And I will be a queen of sons who live to be fathers. Come or do not come. The sea will keep on. We all answer to that. Menin. It did not end with tidy acclamation or neat bows. Nothing in the islands ended so. There were mutters and growls and low laughter. There were knives loosened and then put away. Aeron stood very still and let the salt dry on him into a crust. The crown in his hands again because ceremony needed to be repeated for the stubborn. And Theon took the place at Asha's right shoulder that had been prepared as if it had quietly existed all along. He could feel eyes on him. He could feel Euron's gaze like the press of a coin against skin, warm, shaping a mark that would last the day. He could feel Victarion's frustration, a heat that would not go out until it had found a fight. He could feel the reader's satisfaction, thin and precise. When the moot thinned, and men began to return to their fires and their ships to talk and eat and decide what they would do in light of the sea's speaking, Asha drew Theon away into the shade of Naga's highest rib. The bone held the days cool in it, like a memory. The old giant's age gathered around them, and for a moment the wind was a thing that remembered their mother's hair, and not the old god's breath. "You did it a foolish thing," Asha said. But there was an echo of laughter somewhere in her voice that she had put away for later. "You made yourself an oar where I had meant for you to be the wind." "I am done with the wind," Theon said, and was astonished at the certainty in him, like a keel settling on a true line. The wind takes what it wants. It never remembers what it has taken. "Nenensao." Asha studied his face, then reached up and touched the driftwood crown where it sat on her hair. The reeds had dried into a shape that fit her. The tar left smudges when she put her hand down. She wiped her fingers on her sleeve and did not mind the stain. "You set this on my head." She said, in front of them, in front of Euron. "Do you know what that buys me?" "It buys you me," Theon said. "It buys you my name where it still has weight, and the pity of those it has lost weight with. And it buys you." He groped for the word, not a thing he had ever been good at, and felt for once that the right word wanted to be found. "It buys you my courage, what I have left of it." Asha's mouth went crooked. "It buys me a brother," she said, and then she put her hand against his jaw, light and brief, as if making sure it was truly there. "Stand with me. When Victarion comes, we'll need to give him a prize he can chew. When Euron comes, we'll need to give him a wave that looks like calm from above and breaks his keel when he rides it." "Nenshao." "He will try to break you," Theon said. "He will try," Asha said. "He has tried before. He taught me some things I needed to learn about men who smile. He did not mean to. I paid for that lesson, brother. I will use it." They walked the strand in the long, slow light that comes when the sun is high and the clouds are tired of pretending to be thick. Men hailed them. Old men nodded because they remembered Theon's mother and the way she had sung in the yard at Pike when the wind was right. Young men stared because Asha wore a crown and stood like a captain who had trusted herself all her life. Theon felt their eyes like gulls situating themselves on air. If he moved too quickly, they would scatter. He did not move quickly. At a fire pit where fish char blackened and split open, a good brother with whiskers like rope ends offered Asha a cut on the flat of his knife. She took it and ate, and passed the knife to Theon, as if that were ordinary. He took it because he was sick of being treated as anything but. The fish was hot, and salt, and present. It anchored him. Around them men talked of oars and tides, of the Shield Islands, and whether Old Town slept after dark, of which captains would follow Asha, and which would pretend to follow Asha, and which would pretend to follow, and then slide toward Euron when no one watched. The names went past like buoys. The reader joined them, tearing a heel of black bread with care that implied reading even now, and spoke of grain counts, of winter stores, of lines drawn on maps with charcoal and thumb. "You will not find the reach an easy larder," he said. "They plant as if the earth loves them, and perhaps it does. But a man who hangs roasted geese from his rafters watches his rafters too. We'll need to gather more than twice the men to take what we took last time. Wiser to cut the mander where it is fat and withdraw on the tide," Asha said. "Small raids that sting and keep them wringing hands. If they cannot find the blow they dislike most, they will try to guard everything. They will fail. Victarion will want Hightower," Theon said. The reader's thin smile was all thought. "Victarion wants a stair to climb," he said. "Give him a stair. We'll give him Lord Sport's rebuilding on another island if we're clever," Asha said. He can stack stones with the best of them, if he believes he's stacking skulls. A man who loves the feeling of building may be taught to love building itself. It is not a sure lesson, but we have few sure things. We teach what we can. Memorial Winder. Theon listened to this with a sensation like longing and like grief at once, that so many words in his life had been about taking that hearing words about making tasted both strange and like a drink he had not known he needed. "And Euron?" he asked. Asha wiped her fingers on a cloth and let the wind take it, and then caught it again because even queens did not waste sailcloth. "Euron has to be watched from 3 sides, she said. "From the side that wants to laugh, from the side that wants to be afraid, from the side that wants to admire. Do not give him your admiration. It is the coin he prefers. We will keep a man at his elbow, and another at his stern, and a third at whatever passes for his heart. We will let him talk and be glorious, and ensure there is always something dull for him to do that looks like a jest. The world will take some time to realize we are not doing his jokes." "And now, who will you put to watch him?" Theon asked. "Mokoro would be too much to hope for," the reader murmured, almost to himself, eyes going far. "But a priest who knows fire would cancel out a priest who knows only salt." Asha glanced at Theon. "I will put you to watch him," she said. "And I will put Christopher Botley because he has adored me since he was a fish, and I need his adoration pointed at something dangerous that is not myself. And I will put 2 men no one notices at all, and a boy who notices everything, and has never spoken to me directly in his life." Theon felt cold, and something like an old pride. "He will smell blood on me," he said. "Let him," Asha said. "Let him think you are only blood." In the dark, the old gods watched the first men hang their heads from trees. The gods learned something about patience. So did I. So. She walked on, and Theon walked with her until the sun began to slide a little toward the horizon, and the moot knotted itself into another order. Euron called again because he could not leave the god bee. Asha stepped again beneath the ribs, and men knelt, or did not kneel as their knees and their pride permitted. The crown had dried. Theon looked at it and thought of reeds in a winter marsh, and the way even a child can twist them into shape. And then thought, too, of iron rings and how men make chain by patience. That night the shore burned with 50 small fires. Shadows of men flickered against the ribs. From the longships came the creak and murmur of sleeping crews. Somewhere a man sang a low song with no words in it, only a rise and fall that was the sea's own, and another man joined on a different line, so that for a little time the 2 sounds ran together and then parted, like boats crossing an inlet. Theon sat with his back to the lower curve of one of Naga's ribs and watched the fire's motion through his fingers. He had a cup of sour wine and did not drink more than 2 swallows. Asha lay on her side near the fire with her coat rolled as a pillow and her hand on the driftwood crown, as if it might blow away. "Sleep," she said into the flames, not looking at him, and he felt the old ache behind his eyes and did not let it show. He had lain awake many nights because to close his eyes was to open them in other places. But the sound of the sea and the even scrape of men putting out fires and the weight of old wick itself came over him like a tide. He slept there, under the bones, and he did not dream of knives. He dreamed of rope, not the rope that binds wrists, but the rope a man holds while the deck lurches and knows that the rope holds back. In the morning they put out into a wind with teeth. The fleet did not leave as one thing. Such discipline belonged to men who broke their ships on it. They left as a scatter of long dark shapes pushing into white. Asha took a seat among her oarsmen with a king's crown still damp in her hair and shouted the beat with a captain's voice. The reader hunched with a blanket and a book he could not read in this job, smiling like a man who had a page inside his head he would not lose. Victarion stood on his prow and glared at nothing until something worthy of glaring at should present itself. Euron stood on Silence's quarterdeck with his hands tipped wide as if to feel the air's thoughts. And when Theon glanced across at him, Euron inclined his head as if acknowledging a game begun. Theon did not choose a place at the prow or stern or beneath the mast. He found a coil of rope and set himself there because rope had saved him in his sleep. He watched Asha's back, the way she took the sea's rise as if she had made it, and with every careful breath he took, the air filled him easier. Pike waited. The sea stone chair was not a thing that loved women. It was a thing that loved to cut whoever sat on it, until they bled truth and a color darker than pride. Theon had never thought to love that chair. He had thought to avoid it and its teeth. Now he felt something like pity for the ancient lump of black, and the way it would have to learn a new shape to fit Asha. Spray battered him. It tasted of cold and iron, and the sort of life that smells like rust because it has been paid for. He licked his lips and did not mind the taste. He watched the wake of their ship string white behind them like a line written upon water, and he thought of lines that could be written upon maps and old laws and men's habits, and how some lines lasted, and others broke, and some needed to be thrown away so new ones could be drawn with a steadier hand. Toward midday, a squall came up from the southwest, shouldered the fleet, and went off muttering to bite at some other headland. Asha rode it with an eye narrowed, and the driftwood crown wedged down hard. At dusk, two porpoises ran laughing under the bow like boys too quick to be punished, and made even Victorian ease into something like a smile. Euron's ship did not laugh. It slid. It made even the water around it look sly. The first sight of Pike after a night under old Wake's bones was like seeing a face you had always known with a scar cut across it. The towers were where they had always been, squat and old and wrong-headed, spiked from the rock like a fist thrust out of a sleeve, bridges like frayed ribbons between them. Waves threw themselves at the cliffs and broke until they forgot their names. The gulls screamed the way gulls always had screamed. Smoke from kitchens rose. Theon tasted its ash, and the taste was the past, and the present dragged through each other. Men crowded the headland and the yard. Salt wives craned and shouted. Thralls kept their eyes down and counted in their heads. The sea stone chair squatted in the hall behind the yard, hunched in its dim old thing, older than the men who thought it a throne, older than the laws that gave it meaning, older possibly than the sea's own fondness for iron. Asha went to it with a stride that respected age but did not bow to it. Aeron stood at the door, narrow and mad as any prophet, and raised a hand not to forbid but to bless in his sour way. Victorian took the yard's edge and found a place where men could see him without anyone mistaking that he meant to stand closer than he needed to. Euron entered last, because one allows a performance its last, and he smiled at the chair as if he could already feel the splinters in his palms. Asha stood before the chair and did not sit. She stood. She let the hall fill around her with breath and expectation. Theon moved to her right hand because that was the place he had chosen for himself. He watched the chair watch her. It had watched kings older than their names and would watch men yet unborn. It did not move or speak. It only existed, very black. "I have not come to be made anything," Asha said to the hall, and to the chair, and to all the old stones, and to her father's ghost, and to the sea beating itself to pieces outside. "I have come to work. If you need ceremony, the damfair will drown someone after supper." Laughter broke like a wave and left good wet on the stones. Even Aeron's mouth twitched, and Victorian's hand left his sword hilt and came away empty, and Euron's smile narrowed so that it became a thought. Theon felt the sound go through him and settle in his bones the way the sea settles in wood until the wood breathes it back on hot days. He let his hand lift, just a little, toward the driftwood crown to steady it in case the laughter shook it. It did not shake. It sat. He put his hand down again and let himself breathe. Outside, the tide began to turn. It dragged at the rocks and the ropes and the thoughts in men's heads. It went out with its own business, taking with it fish and foam and some old resentments, and bringing back with it a new sheet of water on which, for a little while, anyone could write anything. Theon Greyjoy stood beside his sister, and the hall watched them, and in that watching old things made their tiny adjustments, and space opened like a bellied sail, and wind that smelled of iron filled it, and the ship that was the Iron Islands began to edge, very slowly, by inches, onto another tack. Oh, Kai. The hall filled with the smell of kelp and lamplight oil and men's damp wool drying. Asha did not sit the sea stone chair that day. She set it behind her like a stone that would not move and stood in front of it, as if to teach the stone to watch from another angle. Theon learned the names of those who spoke first by the way their voices rode the air. There was Drum with his red blade like a tongue that could not keep itself sheathed for long. There was Saltcliffe Broad, who had a farmer's patience because Saltcliffe's topsoil lay thin as a skin, and every furrow had to be coaxed. There was Baylor Blacktide's nephew come in his stead, a quiet youth with the 7 carved into a piece of driftwood he wore at his throat, and kept tucking back under his collar, as if ashamed to let the old gods see the new. There was Christopher Botley, love-sick as ever, his pale eyes forever seeking Asha's shadow on the floor. Theon found he could forgive him that now. The reader sat on the bench end where the low light made him into a figure cut out of a darker night, and only his eyes were alive. Asha had a piece of chalk and a board. It was not the sort of thing the Ironborn brought into a hall with pride, and that made Theon love the board. She leaned it against a pillar, where every man could see it if he chose, chalked lines the way a captain draws shoals on a map, and began to count without apology. She counted ships. Long ships fit for war and age-worn tubs for ferry and fish. She counted oars and men to pull them, and did not let anyone pretend that a boy with his face still unmarked by beard could pull a man's weight more than 2 hours before he needed relief. She counted bolts of sailcloth and lengths of tarred rope and iron clamps that could be spared from repairing an old keel. She counted winter stores and found the counting wanting, and every man in the hall felt the wanting because he could see it on the board, not in a song. "We have 85 ships fit to put to the Mander in one thrust," she said, chalk tapping against wood like a small hammer. "Another 25 could follow within a week if we strip Lordsport of its ferries and make the old men row. That gives us a bite, but not a feast. Victarion." She turned to him as one turns to a cliff that has always been part of the horizon. "You will have 30 and the first wave. You'll take the smallest shield first. You know the tides around that shoal better than any man alive. You'll take it fast, hold a day, and leave. Leave the emptiness as loud as you can." Victarion's brows made a line like a seam driven by mallet. "Leave," he said, suspicious of the word as a cat is suspicious of a door left a heartbeat too long ajar. "Leave," Asha repeated, unafraid of saying anything twice. "Leave the women complaining to their husbands that the food is gone. Leave the Lord swearing to his liege that rain is needed, but the grain was fuller yesterday. Leave the watch scurrying to one aisle and not minding the others. Then we come from another angle." Victarion's mouth shaped the beginnings of a refusal, and Theon watched Asha take that refusal into her hand as if it were rope. "We'll give you a stare," she said softly, too soft for those at the back to hear, the way one talks to a horse with a temper. "And we'll cover your back with sails. You'll have a fight. There's iron for your axe and skulls for your dreams, and men to see you at the front. But I won't spend our strength on a tower when the granaries are what feed us." "Da." Victarion considered that like a man considering the feel of a new haft. At last he grunted. "A fight," he said. "Not a theft. A fight," Asha said, and drew a line on the board that curved like a gust into a bay and out again. "Drum, you'll guard our ribs. You love your sword too much to be patient, but for once you'll pretend. Anyone who tries to come round to Pike's throat meets red rain and goes home regretting." "Then shall." Drum bared his teeth and made a half bow to the chair, not to Asha. "It would do." "Christopher," Asha said without looking at him, because she had learned long ago that looking at him made him foolish. "You will take every shipwright and every hammer, and make sure Lordsport lives again the way an old man learns to breathe slower in winter. I want new slipways where the old ones rotted. I want a chain for the harbor's mouth. I want dry sheds for canvas. Counting will not help us if mice eat what we store." "Damn?" Christopher straightened with the earnestness of a lad called to bear the banner at harvest feasts. "I'll do it," he said. "I'll do it or die trying. Live and do it," Asha said, mild as the reader. "And me?" Theon asked when she had parceled out the first tasks and let Aaron bark his coda to make it taste like prayer. "What of urine?" He felt the room glance at him, the way any room will glance at the thing that is broken and been mended badly and may break again if breathed on. He did not look away from Asha. "You'll do the work that makes our work possible," she said, and left him to follow or not. She wiped her chalk hand on her breeches and left a white print there, as if to mark herself to herself. "Walk with me." They went through the door at the hall's back that led not to any public yard, but to a narrow stair carved by men who had not wished to be seen. A stair that smelled of rock and old oil, and the feeble plants that forced themselves into cracks, where the sea's breath lingers. The stair opened onto a platform no summer guest ever wanted, because the wind came up it like a funneled oath and flung itself at the face. Theon loved it. The platform looked down on 1,000 years of broken water. The sea-stone chair sat behind and below, and to the left. And the platform was nowhere in a king's ceremonies. Asha leaned her elbows on the stone and let the wind bite. "You know him in ways I don't," she said without preamble. "Not when he was young. He would have had no use for either of us then. I mean now. You've been broken, so you can smell how other things break. He is in fragments, and he likes the noise his edges make when they drag across stone. I need you to listen for that noise, because he will try to make it sound like a song." Mendihawa. Theon stared out at the lashes of white, where rocks lifted just enough to show their teeth. He had not thought to be used this way again, and he found that the old easy pride of being weapon and witness together did not come. Something slower came. It might have been relief at being asked to do a thing he could name. "He will tempt Victarion with glory," Theon said. "He will tempt Aaron with visions. He will tempt the boys with games. He will tempt you with wit. He will tempt me with contempt." Then Asha's laugh was a line pulled clean in one stroke. "He will," she said. "You won't bite that hook if I tell you first that it's there." "He has a horn," Theon said. "He has thralls with lips blue as if they've been sucking ice. He has coins and a smile. I think he has a hole in him, and he fills it with the looks of other men. He will try to take this from me," Asha said. She did not touch the crown when she said it. She did not touch anything. The old chair. The counting. The right to say no. "He may take it if I spend too much strength holding it. So I will not grip it like a knot in the rope, when I should be minding the sail. I will give other men things they can hold while I hold this. I will give Victarion a stare, as I said. I will give the damn fair someone to drown before supper. I will give Drum a rumor of red wine sales in a place where red wine sales are not. And I will give Euron the sense that we are not watching the back of his head." "You want me to stand where my shadow falls on it," Theon said. "You want it to fall soft. I want you to stand where he thinks you stand because you can't stand anywhere else," Asha said, her mouth twisting. "And then, I want you to move when it is time." He should have been glad then. He should have felt the old salt quickening and the joy of cunning. Instead, he felt the wind in his mouth and the taste of it, and the remembrance of small hands that had gripped a rope for the first time and feared to let go. "Tell me when it is time," he said. "I will," she said at once. "And when I cannot tell, you will tell me." She set him to it without more fuss than that. She gave him men to stand with. A Botley because Christopher needed to be watched from his own good intentions. A Harlaw cousin who had read too many histories of treacherous men to be easily flattered. And the boy she had spoken of who noticed everything and had never said a word to Asha in all his life. The boy's name was Hake. He had been called Hake since he learned to crawl because he could slip anywhere the way a fish slips through a hand's fingers. He had straw-colored hair and forearms corded with ropes of muscle from pulling nets, and an expression like a shuttered window. They found Euron on the Silence's deck with his shirt unbuttoned to the belly and a pair of white-faced thralls filing his nails as if they were carving ivory. Theon had the impulse to say that thralls carried the rot into a hall the same way damp carried rot into a beam, but he let it pass. Euron's crew were mutes, tongues cut. They moved around their captain like the sea moves around a rock that thrusts too high to be purely a rock. "Little brother," Euron said, and welcomed him as one welcomes a song to an empty room that has not been empty long. "I hoped you'd come." The chair has conquered you for now, I see. How like it is to women to do that. We grow tired of women. We never grow tired of chairs. Chairs are stubborn, Theon said. They never agree to anything. And yet everyone sits, Euron said. He flicked a hand at the thrall, and the boy held up a bowl, as if Euron meant to spit in it. He did not. He merely admired his clean nails and did not disguise the admiration. Have you come to fetch me to my sister like a good dog? I came to see that you remembered what the sea decided, Theon said. It has been known to forget. Euron's smile deepened. The eye under the patch seemed almost to turn, like something alive that lived under a black tide and turned lazily when light touched it. The sea forgets nothing, he said. The men who think they remember for it will tell you so. Drink. Watch. Theon sat. He did not drink. He watched. The horn lay along the rail, its surface slick as if oiled, and the gold bands catching any light as if hungry. Euron saw him look. Touch, Euron murmured. The thing likes to be touched. It eats the men who play it, Theon said, and nodded at the thrall whose lips still held the old rawness, cracked lines that had not yet settled to scars. Everything eats men who play it, Euron said pleasantly. Axes, swords, chairs, priests, mutes, Theon said as if remarking on weather. Song makes men stupid, Euron said. I do not like stupid men to talk. He had a way of taking control of even the smallest pieces of the day, the way a thrall held a bowl, the way a gust took the edge of a sail, the direction of a glance. Theon let him do it. He let Euron feel that everything was arranged for his ease. He let Hake vanish as if he had never been there. He let the Harlaw cousin stand in Euron's blind side and pretend to be interested in the pattern of the decking. He let the Botley speak wistfully of Asha's steadiness and the reach of the Mander and how the wine there tasted of green things, softer than the island's peat. Euron watched them all as if they were gulls, and he were thinking whether gulls could be taught to sing. I will go south, Euron said at last, when silence had made a net and thrown itself back and forth and caught nothing but breath. She wishes me to pinch some lord's cheeks in the Shield Islands. I can do that. I will not do only that. I will fetch you a joke from Old Town, perhaps. The Citadel keeps its jokes chained. And its books, said the Harlaw cousin without moving his gaze. Those too, Euron said. A book can be a joke if you open it at the right place and only read that once. What will you bring back? The Botley asked, because he could not help thinking in gifts when it came to Asha. A story, Euron said, and his smile spilled. And some blood, if I grow bored. Bring salt, Theon said. Bring grain. Bring pig fat. Bring wool tight woven against the cold. The stories can wait. Euron made a small regretful shape of mouth. Little brother, he said. Always the practical clerk. Did the wolves do this to you? They teach their dogs to count bones now? They taught me to count pain, Theon said, letting the words be flat as slate. I learned more than I had meant. I won't forget. You will, Euron said with infinite assurance. It is what men do when they are not me. Euron sailed within the day. He left a ribbon of rumor behind him like a wake that did not go to sea so much as slip through halls and under doors. He meant to bring back a green priest from one of the river god's groves and drown him, and see if the old god liked the taste of a new one. He meant to drag a priest of the Seven by his hair from a sept, and shave his head, and see whether the smoothness changed anything. He meant to fetch a woman who could see the future in smoke. Theon thought perhaps Euron meant to fetch a mirror and admire himself, and bring the mirror and claim it had been a woman. The mutes rowed as if the oars were part of their arms, and silence slid. Asha watched from the headland and did not speak until the last gleam of Euron's stern vanished around the black lip of rock. We will not chase him, she said. We will set our teeth in other meat, and if he wants to make a stew of nonsense, he can do it with rain. Victarion took his 30 and set his prow to the smallest of the shields. He had loved that island since he was a boy, Theon learned. Not because it was beautiful, which it was in a sour way, low and green and girdled in reefs like a necklace too tight for the neck that wore it, but because its tides could ruin a man who thought himself clever. Victarion did not think himself clever. He thought himself strong. The island always had the decency to respect strength before drowning it. On the day they went in, the tide was running like a horse. Victarion rode it. Asha had given him 3 of the best pilots the islands could offer. Men with faces like rope ends who could hear a reef before it showed. And she had promised a beacon on a point of rock at the precise moment the tide should turn. And there it was. A flare of harsh red. And there he went, his prow biting a channel that others followed, and the channels crossing like slim blades. They hit a beach so narrow it spat them back, and Victarion roared and pushed anyway. Boys ran white-legged in the shallows with spears like sticks, and men stumbled from their houses dragging mail shirts over heads still fuzzy with sleep. Theon watched the first clash from Asha's deck, with the old hunger and the new knowledge sitting beside each other and refusing to fight for the seat. He saw Victarion go up the shingle like a bull going into a pen. He saw the islanders' faces when they realized the bull had not broken his neck on the reef, and that the day had to be lived in full. It was not a great battle. Men would later call it so for the sake of telling stories with a good middle and a satisfying end. But it was a quick, hard thing in which Ironborn ran up into a town like a wave breaks, and men within that town slammed shutters and then flung them open because it did no good to keep an air that others meant to take. Victarion found the small keep and made the gate into splinters. He took the lordling who ruled there under a king who ruled someone else, boxed his ears for having the bad taste to be surprised, and took him to the strand and let him go with a shove, the way one lets a fish go when it is too small to waste a pan on. "Come back tomorrow with your hats full of grain," Victarion said, shouting so that the wind would carry it inland. "And sausage, and salt, and men who can mend sails without pricking their thumbs. Do that, and will not burn your boats. Fail, and I'll mark my axe on your door, and sit by your hearth smoking your fire out with your own fat." Bah! It was crude and true. It was exactly the sort of promise islanders believed, because they understood promises that sounded like the sea. He left within the hour with the tide, leaving the emptiness as loud as Asha had asked. Women stood in groups with mouths tight and baskets clutched, and looked inland, because to look at the sea was always to risk loving it again. For 3 days they struck like that and did not stay. On the 4th day, Asha turned her prow not to the islands, but to the Mander's mouth, where the river came couching its green wealth to the sea, like a rich man setting his belly before a new belt. She did not go up it like a conqueror. She went into a little cove 2 miles east, where reeds stood with their heads together, like gossiping women. There she put men ashore with soft feet and told them the names of barn doors to look for, and the way the latch lifts when a man is too old to lift it properly. She told them to take sacks and not set fires and not touch any girl with a voice higher than the gulls. She told them to be gone before full dark made fools of them, and brought them back any that disobeyed, and took their spoils from them with her own hands. "You are making wives of us," Dunstan Drum said with a sneer that he thought made him look younger. "I am making you full," Asha said, and smiled then in the old Ironborn way that says the smile can be argued with, but you will be arguing with a knife. Theon took a small party north along the coastal track that men used when the weather had been too bad to bring the barges down the Mander. He had 2 men who spoke in their farmer's way about goats and gulls, and the taste of marsh mint, and hake, and a black-haired woman from Orkmont called Ula, who had broken 3 men's noses when they called her pretty. They went at evening into a village whose church bell had cracked last winter, and whose shepherds had already driven their flocks high to avoid the marshes damp on the lambs. They did not find soldiers there. They found a storehouse that smelled of wheat and mouse shit, and a little girl with a smear of jam at the corner of her mouth peering from behind a door. Theon sent Hake into the loft to pull down the sacks and Ula, to pull down the girl and tell her a true story about a time Ula had hid, and then wished she hadn't. He stood in the doorway as if the doorway were a breaker, and he held the rope set across it. He had a way of standing now that made men understand they should not try to rush past him. Perhaps it was that he made no show of readiness. He merely was ready. Old men looked at him and weighed the cost of foolishness. They were sensible. They put sausage into sacks and salt into sacks, and a jug of oil that was precious to them, and hence a sign that they meant to live in this house tomorrow, and the next day not run away and pretend the place had never had their name. The mander tasted different from the sea. It was sweet and lazy and treacherous in a way that did not bother with reefs. It lured men away from their course with comfortable bends, and then took their keel into mud and held it there until the tide came and turned a small mistake into a drowning. Asha kept her prows in the river's mouth and did not let them seek that comfort. She pulled them away with the same hard care she had used to keep Theon from drowning in a pool of himself. They cut 3 such bites and did not bruise the skin enough to raise the watch's welt. By the time the watch moved men and horses to the river mouth and started to set up a camp to make a show that they had always meant to be there, Asha had moved the scene and bloodied another lip waterward. What was taken was measurable: 3 dozen sacks of wheat, 6 of barley, 2 of salt that would hurt some fisher's heart to lose, a cart full of onions that made Hake cry in a way that even he sounded surprised by, and 2 women who came to Asha with their chins high and asked to be taken away to the islands where a life might be different. "Why?" Asha asked them with no softness. "Do you think we flow with milk? Do you think it is easier to freeze on a rock than tire in a field? Do you think my men raise their sons gentler than yours?" One of the women had the look of one who had taken beatings and never thought to count them as anything but weather. She looked at Asha and then at Theon. "I think I can work hard anywhere," she said. "And I think sometimes the sea remembers women better than the land." Asha took them aboard and set them to scrubbing decks and gutting fish, and did not promise weddings or a better share out of spoils. She promised work. The women accepted. They sang low as they worked, a song with no words. The Ironborn listened. They pretended not to. Word came of Victarion's small victory, and of the cart that had arrived the next day, piled with grain and sausages, and men with clumsy fingers for sail mending trying to look as if they had done that work all their lives. Word came of Drum putting 2 boats back into the surf with the flats of his sword, because the men in them wore colors that displeased him. Word came last of Euron. Silence had gone into an inlet 20 miles west of Old Town like a hunting shadow, and the parish there had found its sept door open in the morning, and a rope dragging from the bell with no bell upon it, and on the altar, a fisherman's knife with a blue-painted handle stuck through a page torn from a book. The page was a list of kings who had never ruled the islands and never would. "He will make jokes until someone laughs," Asha said when the tale came to Pike with the boy who had run until his lungs burned in 2 colors. "Do not laugh. If you cannot help yourself, laugh into your sleeve." Aeron Danfair came to her that night, his hair dripping and his eyes dry with fury. He stood in the arch with his feet set stubbornly apart like any cliff face, and did not cross the threshold, because even his god had taught him that all sacred things must be approached with a certain care. "You profane the chair," he said without preface. "I have not yet sat it," Asha said. "It does not know my name. If I profane, I do so with sums." "You set the old way aside," Aeron said. "You make the iron price into counting. You keep men from drowning and make ledgers of it. The god will drown the ledgers. He will drown you." Asha did not ask him inside. She stepped into the arch and put her back against the stone and her palms there also, and looked at him the way men look at weather when they intend to make use of it, instead of complain. "You set boys underwater," she said. "Some of them come up. Some do not. Is that the god? Or is that you?" His eyes flinched, and Theon saw the flinch and felt it echo somewhere in him that had been bruised so many times that a fresh touch made old pain move. "I am his hand," Aeron said. "If his hand crushes, then his hand is careless," Asha said. "My hand will not be. I will drown a boy when I must. I will not drown a boy because it suits a word. You want the old way, I will give you it. I will take. I will hold. I will pay in iron. I will lose when the sea says. But I will not throw boys away to fatten you." Danfair's mouth flattened. He had had that used against him before, by men with less right to say it. He had said then that the god could not be questioned, because the god had given men the sea, and men had only given the god their breath. He looked at Asha as if she were a thing being tested for weakness by a knife's tip. "You are a woman," he said at last, and old grief ran through the word like a cut. "You are a woman on a seat. I set crowns upon wet heads so that men may feel the God on their brow. And now I put one on a woman's. How shall I answer him when he asks me why I did what I did?" "You'll say the sea told you," Asha said with smooth cruelty. "Isn't that what you always say?" Damfair's breath made harsh saw teeth in his throat. He lifted his hands, took them down. He looked at Theon as if Theon might provide an answer to some riddle he had never known an answer to before. "I dreamed of Balon," he said. "He was cold. He was not under the water. I do not know where he was. That is wrong." "Everything is wrong," Theon said, and met his uncle's eyes, and did not let the old boy fear hold his breath in his mouth until his chest ached. "We do what we can with wrong. And sometimes it is less wrong afterwards." "Menetrus." Damfair flinched again, as if the knife had slipped and found bone. He left without blessing and without threat. His God would do what his God did. Theon watched him go, and knew the man's anger would blow and blow, until perhaps it blew itself out, or perhaps it would never. Asha did not waste thought on it. She went back to her board. At Lordsport, the hammers began to speak. The sound carried along the headland and into the narrow streets and down to the shale where boys skipped stones and pretended not to count the skips. Theon went there because he could not bear to hear work begin and not be in it. He found a shipwright he remembered from his boyhood, a wide man named Olmar, whose beard had always kept crumbs, as if it had been a pantry. "Lord Theon," Olmar said without fuss, and handed him a mallet. "You remember where to hold one of these?" "I used to put my fingers here," Theon said, indicating the wrong place, and Olmar grunted a laugh because he would have laughed at a king if the king had tried hard enough. They lifted beams so old, they had learned how to creak without splitting. They set posts for a new slip, where the old posts had sunk into the mud, and let a boat take the wrong angle on the launch that spring and grind itself like grain. They laid a chain across the mouth of the harbor, and felt in their arms the weight of it answer with iron honesty. Theon liked that. The way some work responded at once to what you asked, and did not need to be coaxed with lies. The thralls worked too. Asha had set watches over the men who drove them, and when a man's whip went up too often, a Harlaw who had read books and a Botley who had built feasts stood together and took the whip away. The thralls still drove nails and hauled rope, and swore under their breath like any man in cold spray. They did it differently though. Theon could not say what was different, only that when sundown came, and the pause came with it, and men looked at what they had done that day, the thralls looked too, and the looking meant something. Christopher came to show Asha his hands blistered and raw and shining with fish's scales that had got under his nails, and would not be teased out. He was as proud of those hands as any boy is proud of a new scar. Asha looked, nodded, and told him he would wash the harbor shed floors the next day, because you could not fix beams and let filth climb the wood. "Will you never thank me?" he asked her, half laughing and half in grief. "I will thank you when you do a thing that needs thanks and not only doing," she said. "Go on. Your mother named you Christopher, not Treasure." And so, when he had gone away pink-eared, the reader said from the shadow of an old post, "You are cruel to him." Asha did not turn her head. "He will live longer for it," she said. "He always believed the world would give him what he wanted because he wanted it. If he learns to want the right things, I will let the world give them to him." "And Theon?" the reader asked. "Theon knows what to want," Asha said. "He wants not to be broken. He wants a rope that holds." "Then?" "He also wants to be the boy he remembers," the reader said. "Kind as spindrift and as cutting. He will never be that." "Neither will I," Asha said. "Neither will you. That's the work. Now tell me, uncle, is there iron in the Harlaw Hills that we can bring down without breaking a dozen men's necks on our own cliffs?" He told her the ways. She set men to go with mules and sledges along paths that had been used for church stone 4 kings back, and had not been used since because men had admired the church, and not admired the road it took to build it. She sent a boy ahead of them with a flag and a horn to warn of rockfalls, and was not ashamed to be so plodding. When the first cart of pig iron came to Lordsport, She stood and looked at it as if it were a child being brought into a house in winter with cheeks too red for health. She set a guard on it, as if it were a captive lord. She did not let Euron's absence dazzle her into forgetting that a single chain link meant more against hunger than a single beheaded foreign priest meant in any hall. The first real blood came by night, when a band of Westermen tried to cut their way up the same path the sledges had used, and set fire to the stores that had been piled too near the headland's edge, where wind could get into them. Theon woke with the smell of pitch and the particular panic that comes when a man who has slept in too many burning places knows in his bones the way fire moves, even when he cannot see it yet. He was on his feet and down the steps from the tower before his body knew how to be on its feet. Hate ghosted at his shoulder. The wind took the breath and shoved it back into men's throats and took it again. The sound of a man screaming from inside a burning thing is unlike any other sound. Theon did not hear it, and was glad. They found the Westermen on the headland's west side, of course, the path most men would call the logical one, because it looked almost like a real path. It was narrow and shelved, and a misstep meant a tumble that would break a man's legs, and then the sea would take him by the throat and finish the work. The Westermen had chosen a night with a thin moon, and the sort of cloud that cannot decide whether to be fog and cannot be bothered to slip away. They had chosen wrong. Hake had left pebbles balanced on 2 of the ledges in the afternoon, and those pebbles now lay on the 3rd ledge with the slow satisfaction of a trap sprung. Theon killed 2 men there fast, with a knife. He'd always been a fair hand with a bow, and a scornful hand with a knife. He'd had swords he loved because other men admired them. He understood the knife now. It went where you put it. If you put it there, it did that. He moved on the path like a man walking with a load in each hand that must not be spilled, and the men behind him moved the same. And the Westerman ahead of him stumbled and left a curse hanging on a rock like a wet rag. By the time the wind had pushed the smell of pitch hard into every mouth, the fire was out. The stores did not catch. 3 men who had tried to set them went into the sea tied together with a rope around their waists, and there they thumped on the rocks until they were quieter. Asha stood in the dawn and looked at the char, and at the place where Hake's pebbles had moved, and at the rope burning through, at the knot where the 3 had been tied, because the friction on stone heats rope faster than men imagine. And she nodded and said, "Thank you, to no one in particular and to everyone." "Victarion will want a proper battle," Theon said when they sat with tea in cracked mugs and bread hard as iron and cheese that had sweated and then cooled and gone waxy. "He can have a small one," Asha said. "There's a lord on the 2nd island who hates the lord on the 1st more than he hates us. We will let him show it. Victarion can be the showing." "You marry them?" Theon asked, the old joking impulse climbing his throat and being caught there by caution. "I'll marry them if I need to," Asha said. "Not to each other. To hunger, and to fear of looking foolish. Those 2 are better husbands than any lord I've met." Word came then flying in like a wet gull that has stolen a slab of eel pout from a boy. Euron had struck a little port on the other side of Old Town, and had taken a priest of the 7 and shaved his head and painted a kraken on it, and left him walking home with a sack of blue-dyed salt that dyed his hands blue and would not wash. The tale got bigger as tales do. In some versions, Euron's mutes had cut the man's tongue, and in some, they had cut his ears. In some, Euron himself had carried the man on his back for 10 miles, and told him the whole way that he would tell the god what he had seen when he died. The truth was probably the salt and the paint. Theon took the tale to Asha, and laid it like a dead fish on a table, and waited to see whether she meant to eat it or bury it. "Let him play," she said at last. "He will want to show me his toys. We will stand at the window and praise the pretty colors, and then go on with mending the sail. The hard thing will be keeping Victarion from running after him with a shout." And Victarion ran after him with a shout 3 days later when a Shield Isle's banner was hoisted upside down on a hill, the old sign that someone within the hill wanted someone without it to come ruin their neighbor. Victarion had always been the sort of man to read a sign as an order. He took 5 ships and went to learn whether the sign was a trap. It was half a trap and half a plea. The lord on that hill had 5 jealous cousins and 3 hungry sons and too many cattle for the grass, and a fence that had gone to hole. He wanted cousin Jahan dead, and he wanted the Ironborn to do it and then leave so that he could call himself hard and tell his men he had checked the raiders himself. Victarion obliged him in the first half, because a small battle with throats to open is a gift to a man like Victarion. He did not oblige him in the second. He sat in the Lord's hall with his feet on the table and cracked 3 ribs in a game of hands turn with a man who thought he'd invented the blow and took bread and salt. And when the Lord told him to go in the morning, he stayed a day longer to sharpen his axe and tell the Lord's wife that her husband snored. Asha let him have it. Theon watched her fight not to go pull him by the ear. A stare. She reminded herself aloud. A word he'd never heard anyone else use to haul herself back. He liked watching her think. There had been men, gods help them, who had liked watching Asha for the way her mouth made men think of their own hunger. Theon liked the way her eyes slid across a problem, and did not grow annoyed when the problem did not fall to flattery. He liked the way she took counsel, and then took none when the counsel disgusted her. He liked the way she had put her hand on a crown and not clutched it. At 10 Towers, the reader set his table with maps, and stripped his supper to bread and fish, so that no grease stain would ruin a coastline. The wind moaned there always, even when it was still, because 10 Towers had built itself to hear the sea, and pretend to hold it in the pipes. Asha stood like a captain, hands braced on either side of the chart, and the reader placed chills and currents before her like old friends. Old Town's beacon drowns men's courage, he said. It says, we are rich, and we are seen, and we are cared for by men with ink on their hands. Some men will never go near because of the light alone. Euron will be drawn to it because it blinds other men. Can we draw him with another light? Asha said. A smaller one. You can always draw a moth, the reader said. You cannot always draw a hawk. We could set rumor that Redwine had returned to Arbor with a belly full of wine and a leak, Theon offered, standing a little back, because the room made him feel the way great trees in the Wolfswood had made him feel, that he was in the presence of something old that would not move if he pushed it. Euron will want to cut that belly open and drink of it. He will know the wine is not there before he tastes, the reader said, but he will come to admire his own caution in discovering that he was not fooled. Admiration is what you don't give him, Asha murmured. The reader turned to Theon with the mild surprise of a man finding a forgotten book pushed behind a chest, and opening it, and discovering it fits perfectly a question he has had for years. You will perhaps live, he said to Theon, if you continue to say what needs to be said, and not what makes you the more amusing. That night in the tower's thin bed, Theon dreamed of Winterfell for the first time in months, without waking with his hands at his throat. In the dream, the Godswood had no snow. The pool was dull and brown and perfect, and the heart tree's face was not cruel. The face was exhausted, as if it had been watching too long and wanted to close its eyes. He woke with the feel of bark under his palm. There was only rock. He met the black-tied youth in a passage by a slit window where the wind came like a thin blade, and the view was an inch of sea that never changed. The youth kept worrying at his driftwood 7, and Theon took it from him, and turned it over and handed it back. You won't fit that to our stone, Theon told him not unkindly. You can hang it in your own house and do as you please. You can hold it in your fist and not let anyone take it, but don't press it against our walls. The walls don't care. The youth flushed and nodded. My uncle says I shouldn't have brought it, he said in a rush. He says I should wear the god that drowns me like a crown on my tongue. Your uncle has drowned his tongue, Theon said, and made the boy laugh then, and the laugh sat better on the boy's face than piety had. The raid work began to feel like breathing. Men can grow used to stealing breath between waves. They can time themselves to it and make it look like art. Theon had thought he would spend the rest of his life struggling to find air and be grateful when any offered. He found himself lifting his head between waves and looking around. He found himself speaking before spoken to and expecting to be heard. He found himself not flinching when a door opened behind him. He found himself standing with a piece of bread in one hand and a pick in the other in a shed at Lordsport, and remarking to Ulmar that the beam above their heads had worm in it. And Olmar looked up and saw and said, "Right you are," and sent a boy to fetch a strap of iron to bind it in its shame. He did not scarce notice the first time a girl looked at him, not as at a broken piece of rock on the shore, but as at a man. She was salt-born, not pretty, with an authority in her shoulders that comes of pressing a boat through surf 100 times, and failing, and trying again. She held herself like a fact. She brought fish to the hall, and when she left, she turned and said to him, "You eat too little," like a command. He grunted, and later, because the words had stuck, he ate more. When Euron came back, he came with bells. They were not from a sept. They were not from a hall. They were from a ship. He had cut them from a ship that had been meant to be a great lady's pleasure craft, painted white and hung with streamers, because the lady had a sense of pageant. He hung the bells on Silence's rigging, and did not suffer them to ring because his crew were mutes, and the ship would not learn the trick from bells. The bells were there to remind men that there could be a noise whenever Euron light. He came into Pike smiling, and brought with him a man whose teeth had been filed to points, and whose breath smelled of cloves and cunning. "He sees things in smoke," Euron said of the man, who bowed very low but had his eyes up the whole time. "He can tell me whether my sister means to love me or drown me." "I will not love you," Asha said as sweetly as perfidy. "As for drowning, I leave that to the damn fair." The smoke seer burned something in a shallow dish in the hall, and the smoke rolled up white, and then gray, and then the exact color of the oily black stone of the chair. And men muttered, because they thought perhaps they were seeing a thing. And then the reader sneezed. Theon watched Euron's mouth tighten a fraction, and he watched Asha make her face into a pleasant waiting, and not look to either side. And he watched Victarion hold himself back as a man holds himself back from touching a brazier, because though he likes the smell, he knows the heat will betray him. "What do you see?" Euron asked the man, and the man gave out words the way a fishmonger gives out fish. Old, and with a smile that says he might charge more for the next. "I see a black sea," the man said. "I see a chair with a woman in front of it, and a man behind it. I see a horn. I see a red, no, not a dragon, a red sail." "Enough," the reader said sharply, and the word cut through smoke like a wind that knows where to blow. "You see what any man would see who had been in this hall long enough to learn the names of its parts. Take your spice and your breath, and go stand on my tower and see whether you can tell me whether the wind veers. If you can, you may stay a week. If not, go back to the dunes you crept out of." Euron's smile returned the way a cat returns to milk spilled on a table. "Uncle," he said. "Always the host. Always the reader." Roderick Harlaw said, "Read this. Your toy makes hungry boys gape. It makes men who should know better pretend they are not bored, so that you will like them and throw them a sweet. It does not change the tide. It does not fill the nets. It does not raise a wind when there is none. It scares gulls," Theon said. "I saw 3 fall out of the sky." Euron turned to him then with an interest that could be a kindness if one forgot everything one knew. "And that did not delight you?" he asked. "Little brother, I thought you loved to watch things fall that imagined they could fly." "I can swim," Theon said, and did not look away. Asha gave Euron work to do the next day that he could not refuse without making himself small before the hall. She gave him 3 ships, and told him to run them between Pike and Harlaw, with canvas and oil and saltfish, and not lose a single barrel. She told him to dock at 10 towers, and sit down to bread with the reader, and listen to a tale about a king no one cared about, and stay awake. She told him to go to Lordsport, and carry his own barrels on his own shoulder, so that every thrall and every free man could see his back bend, and know that for this day, at least, he had a back like theirs. "You would make a deckhand of me," Euron said softly, the way a man says to a child. "You would knife me in my sleep." "I would make a king of you," Asha said just as soft. "The kind I need. The kind who can work when the wind dies." He went. He smiled and went. Men who saw him carrying barrels remembered the smile, and thought themselves fools for believing the weight was in the barrel, and not in the smile. He put 1 barrel down by Olmar's yard and dusted off his hands and said, "My sister is a genius of drudgery, loudly enough for any man to overhear, and it pleased some of them and angered others, and meant nothing to the sea. Theon followed him enough to measure the weight of Euron's patience. It was more than he had guessed. It had the feel of a man who can lean on a mast in a flat calm all day and not move until the first stir lifts the sails edge an inch. He made small mischiefs instead of large ones. He told a boy that if the boy stuck his head through a hole in a barrel and tried to look at the world from inside it, he would see what God saw. He told a girl that he could see the future between her fingers when she held her hands like this. He kissed a thrall on the mouth and then told him to go wash it in salt because he did not want his lips softened. He kept his mutes close and let them look at Theon as if Theon were meat walked on legs and didn't mind who carved. Theon took the time he had and went to Harlaw with Asha when she went to speak to Sigfrid Silverhair and his daughters. The women there sharpened the island with their eyes. They loved Asha as one loves the one who keeps a dance from stopping. They did not trust her crown. They said a queen would want more of them than a captain did and would give less back. Asha stood with her chalk and her board even there and drew the way harvests flowed and the way men could stick a barrel under the stream and fill it and move the barrel inland and open it when the sea was in ice or in anger. "You want to sow," one of Sigfrid's daughters said bluntly, tossing her braid like rope. "You want us to sow with you. You will sow, and in winter a lord will come and reap while we hide our children from his riders, and the sea laughs because it has nothing to do with any of it. Why should we not cut and go and leave them to drink sun like milk when we are gone?" "Nah." "Because the sun scalds," Asha said. "Because you will need something to drink in the night. Because I have no love for any lord who comes out of Old Town smelling like books and violets to count in my yard, but I have less love for men who call themselves my captains and cannot keep count of their own men's hunger. Because the old way is not a way of dying. It is a way of taking and holding. The holding part we forgot. I mean to remember it for us. Mentor." The women looked at one another and threw their heads in a way that meant both acceptance and challenge. "Make that holding feel like holding," the eldest said. "Don't make it feel like being held." Asha nodded as if she filed a nail. "I won't," she said. She did one other thing in those days that made more trouble than any raid. She named a thrall free. The man had taken an arrow in the shoulder that would have festered on any other day and killed him, but Hake had broken the shaft clean and Ulla had poured brine on it without flinching at his scream. And the next day the man had taken up his oar and rowed his strength without one complaint, when another man might have lied down and expected to be carried. He had done it again on the day after, and the day after that. Asha stood him up in the yard at Pike and said, "Your debt is paid. Go find a wife or daunt as you like. Go find a boat. The sea will not remember your name, but I will." Nan. There was silence because no one knew whether to cheer. Aeron hated it instantly and cleanly. Victarion thought about it for the time it takes to drink a cup and said, "He's not a weaker oar today than he was. Why should I care?" Drum sneered and said, "One man turns soft, makes 10 that need turning," and the reader murmured, "Ah," in the tone he used when a note he had been sure was at the bottom of a page appeared at the top of another. The thrall, no, the man, stood with his mouth open like a fish and no sound in it, and then shut it and nodded and ran. Theon watched him go and felt something at the base of his own throat break and mend at once. "You'll make them think we will do that for every man with good luck," Aeron said that night. "I will do it for every man with good steadiness," Asha said. "Luck is for songs. Steadiness is for ships." Aeron said he would pray for her. Asha said she would let him do so if he did it in a corner where she could not hear him. They were both content. Theon went to the strand and put his hands in water that wanted to be warmer, and wondered when in his life he had learned to ask that of water. A message came in a clean bottle with pitch on the cork that told Theon at once it had been sealed by a man who knew how to keep sea out of things. It had a bit of ribbon tied below the cork, red gone to rust. He cracked it and tipped the note into his palm. The hand was not Euron's. It belonged to a man who had learned to write in order to keep his accounts straight, not to charm anyone. The words were brief. "Your sister wants to be a queen of barns. I will be the king of bells. Look to Harlaw's third tower by moonrise if you wish to hear one ring." He took it at once to Asha. She did not ask him why he had not burned it. She did not call him fool for reading the thing to its end. She looked at the neat figures Mander ink makes when it dries on island air and went still. He has someone in the tower. She said, and turned to the reader. Which one is the third? The one with the green glass, the reader said. He could not have chosen it more carefully if he had been born my son. I am tempted to ask him whether he has ever read a book about my house. Bender. He will not ring your good bell. Asha told him with a smile that went as far as her eyes and then carefully stopped. He will ring one he brings with him. He will want the sound to be his. Then we will not listen, the reader said. They went anyway. They went because ignoring Euron made him worse, not better. They went because if they sent anyone else, Euron would call them cowards, and the word would stick to the halls like grease and smell when the lamps were lit. They went because Theon needed to see the bell rung or not rung, or he would see it every night in his head, and the bell would always be rung there, very beautifully, and it would be his fault. They took no men. They went as captains sometimes go, to look, to think, to see whether the wind is in the right quarter, for the thing the heart does not want, but the head knows must be done. The night lay thin. The tower rose. The green glass in its slits took moonlight and made a false sea of its own. Euron stood on the platform with his shirt open and his hand on the rope of a bell that had never hung there. He had set the bell on a beam and tied it down and wedged it with a block. It would ring if someone who liked ringing made it ring. He placed one finger to his mouth and smiled, as if caught at mischief by a parent who could not bear to be stern. Don't, Asha said. Don't, Euron repeated, and tilted his head. Don't what? Don't ring. Ah, this? He tugged the rope and the bell spoke. It was not a beautiful bell. It had once been, perhaps, in the lady's ship, where it had rung to call sweet plain boys to pass sweet cakes on silver trays. Now it rung like a hoarse throat. It made a sound that Theon felt in his teeth and in the cups of his ears and in the sensitive places where a man expects to be licked by a wave. It said nothing of power. It said nothing of throne. It said, someone wants attention. Now we have all heard it, Asha said coolly. Has your itch been scratched? A little, Euron said, and looked at Theon as if Theon's face were a coin he had not finished biting. Did you enjoy the ringing, little brother? Did it remind you of any bells? It reminded me of hawser needs checking at the third notch, Theon said. It sounded wrong. Something in its heart is cracked. Euron laughed. Ah, he said again in the reader's tone, and bowed to Asha. And this is the queen you give me. Very well. I will go and find a better bell. There are more. He went, with his mutes trailing him like a flock that had forgotten what it meant to cry. Asha stood looking out over the dark, and then reached and took the bell's rope, and cut it with her knife so cleanly that the bell swung once, slow, and then didn't swing again. Do not give him the bell, she said. He will make us think bells are all there are. They did the work. The ships moved. The arcs on Asha's board thickened, and when she wiped them away to draw new arcs, Theon had the foolish sensation that she had wiped away water on stone. He did not know anyone else who could make chalk do that. Victarion came home with a shield bearing another man's sigil, and hung it upside down over his bed, and declared that it was his now, and would remain so until someone stole it back and made him laugh. Drum slept with his sword unsheathed and sang to it under his breath like a man soothing a baby. Aeron drowned a boy and brought him up and slapped him, and made him praise the god for letting him scream. The boy screamed, and then laughed weeping, and kissed Aeron's hand, and Asha's boot, and Theon's sleeve, and went running because he had not died. 2 men in Old Town swore oaths to bring men down on them. 3 others swore oaths to run wine down river at night to trade for salt and fish, because their wives had told them not to be fools when a winter was ahead. The high tower shone. The citadel wrote. The red wine men kept drinking, because that is what red wines do no matter what they are doing. Theon found himself on a night at the strand with Ula and Hake, and the Botley looking out to where a line of phosphor marked a shoal. The sea glowed there because something small living was struck and struck again, and chose to make light when struck, as if to say, "Here I am." Perhaps it drew larger mouths. Perhaps it drew men's mouths to say, "Ah." The four of them watched and said nothing for a time, and then the Botley said, "I used to think the light meant gods. Now I think it means fish." "Why shouldn't gods be fish?" Ula asked. "Fish get eaten. Gods that get eaten have never been our sort," Theon said. "We like the kind that eats." Hake, who never spoke to Asha, spoke to Theon for the first time. "She eats then," he said. "Your sister." "She eats, but she chews slow." "She does," Theon said. And a wave came up and reached their boots, and reached just enough so that they had to step back or be damp all night. And they stepped back. What came next was not dramatic. It was not the sort of thing men write into their songs, because it did not give the voice a chance to swell on a name and break. It was work. It was rope and tar and brine and onions and chalk. It was a night in a barn near the mander when Theon lay with his knife under his hand and listened to an old man's breath wheeze and not know whether the old man would rouse and cry out and bring men with torches. It was a morning on Harlaw when Asha fought a woman with hands harder than her knife, because the woman did not want to give up the habit of beating a thrall for not being her husband. Asha knocked her down and then helped her up and handed her a bucket and said, "Fill this," and the woman filled it and cried, and Asha did not say anything about the crying. It was a noon at Pike when Euron brought Theon a cup of wine, and Theon put it aside, untouched, and Euron said, "Do you think I would poison you when I could do so much else?" And Theon said, "I think you would waste nothing." And Euron smiled as if Theon had paid him a compliment. It was a winter fish run heavier than any man had guessed at, and a spring barley sowing on great wick that looked like hope pushed into earth one grain at a time with a thumb. It was Victarion taking his shirt off and standing in the surf to let waves hit his chest, and shouting at them to hit harder, and a little boy standing beside him with his chest puffed out, shouting nothing at all, because he was trying out the sound. It was a place in Theon where the knife he had carried in sleep began to dull, and then needed sharpening, and then did not need to be under his hand for a single night. And in the morning, he felt foolish and felt safe, and then felt angry at both feelings, and went and found Almar, and took a mallet and hit something that needed to be hit, and the anger went into the beam and stayed there. It was Asha eventually sitting the sea-stone chair, not on a day of ceremony, but on a day when her knees were tired, and the chalk had run to a stub, and she sat and rubbed the chalk on her trouser leg to make it longer, and said to Theon, "This thing is uncomfortable." And Theon said, "It's older than being comfortable was invented," and she laughed. It was Aeron not blessing her and not cursing her, and looking at the chair as if it had tricked him, and looking at the sea as if it had tricked him, and looking at his own hands as if they had done the trick. It was the reader putting a book down and going to the window and standing there longer than he read. The first real test broke upon them without horns, because horns were for men who liked noise and needed warning to find their courage. The test came with fog. Fog came up the Mander in skeins. It wound around the shield isles and made them look like things floating on milk. It slid over the headlands so men walked out of it like dreamers and did not know where their hands had gone. Theon woke, and the hall felt like a boat in thick weather, every sound close and near. He moved. Hake found him, as if that were what Hake did when fog came. They went to the chain at Lordsport and found 6 men from the reach there with files, and the files squealed, and the men turned, and one of them had painted his face with ash so that he looked like an old tree. It was not a fight to make a song, but 3 of the men went into the water, and 1 went onto the rocks, and the other 2 dropped to their knees and put their hands out and said, "Mercy?" And Theon thought about what that word had meant to him, and then he tied their hands and took them to Asha, and Asha sent them back to their men with a rope tied to their wrists, so their men could lead them like oxen and learn something about being led. Fog made men stupid. Asha knew this and set watchers where men become stupid. She set one on the path to the iron, and one in the second tower at Harlaw, where a light could be shown twice and covered, and shone twice again to mean go back. And one on the black wind, her own dear ship, where a boy could strike flint and hold it under his coat and make a small fire that would mean, we are here. She did not set one on the sea stone chair. The chair did not need telling. Euron took the fog as if it had been sent to him with a bow. He went into it and left small, cutting things behind him like bits of shell that bare feet find. He did not strike anything large. For 3 days, men came to Asha with eyes like cats, and told her of little cut ropes and fish, dumped out of nets, and a man found with his hair shaved and laughing, and not knowing why he laughed. She listened and nodded, and set ropes that were thicker, and put the fish back, and shaved a man's head herself for lice, and told him if he laughed again she'd have Hake stand on his foot until he learned what quiet was. At dusk on the 4th day, the fog lifted enough to show silence where it had been all along, outside the chain and off the headland, and far enough that none could reach it with a boat before the fog came back. Euron was at his rail. He lifted one hand to Theon, and Theon lifted his in answer. They could not have touched each other if they stretched an oar between them. The space between them tasted like salt licked off a knife. Asha came to stand beside Theon, and for once she did not say anything. They watched their brother watch them. Sometimes that is all there is to do, Theon thought. Sometimes the work is to stand and be watched, and not move and not falter, and not be made to dance by a bell or a horn, or anyone's painted smile. The fog took silence again by the edges, and then by the mast, and then by the stern. And down at the chain Olmar spat and said, "Back to it," and a thrall hauled, and the chain sang. The song was ugly and true. It was the sound of metal against metal, and it said, "We hold." The days stretched. The chalk wore thin. The onions sprouted in the barrels and had to be eaten quick. The men of the Reach learned to ride fast to the river mouth and to ride back slow, because no one wants to bring horses home broken. Victarion got his battle properly and came away with a cut on his cheek. He would show with pride until it scarred, and then he would show the scar with more. Drum found a red wine pennant carried by a boy and cut the pennant away and let the boy go home naked, and the boy arrived laughing, because he had outlived a story he would tell poorly and would want to tell again and again until someone shut him up. Aeron drowned a man who did not come up and did not blame Asha, which was as close to blessing as the man had to give. Euron brought his smoke man back, and the man said that he saw a woman crowned, and a man behind her with his head down, and a horn and a red sail, and a ship that was not wood. Theon began to say, "Anyone can see." But Asha put her hand lightly on his sleeve, and he swallowed the words, and took them away, and threw them off the cliff where such words belong, because some men need their tricks and are easier to steer when they feel the trick working upon them. On a night when the stars looked close enough to catch in a net, and the wind had gone away to speak with other winds, Asha and Theon took bread and a flask, and went down to the low rocks that the sea barely bothered with. They ate like children. They counted boats by the taste their paint had left in the air. They did not speak of what would come when winter came in full, and the Mander ran cold as a knife. An old town sent its rich boys with their father's bright armor to play at keeping raiders out in weather that does not care about fathers. They did not speak of what would come when Euron grew bored and found a way to break one of the chains that Asha had made out of work and patience. They did not speak of Theon's nightmares or Asha's brief crying in the tower once, when she had thought no one would come and no one did, except Theon, who sat on the steps and did not enter and did not say her name, and listened until the crying ceased and only said, when she came down, "There is a worm in the beam above the 3rd slip." And she said, "I know." And they smiled at each other as if the worm They did not speak because they knew their words would not yet be good enough. They kept them for a day when words would matter more. They chewed the bread and drank the poor wine and watched the sea make and unmake itself 1,000 times upon the same few stones. A gull came to stand near them and cocked its head and lifted one foot and tucked it up into its feathers and stood on the other for a long time. Theon tried to mirror it and lost his balance and laughed, and Asha shoved him with the side of her boot and called him an idiot and told him to eat more. When morning came and the fog burned and the chalk was new and unbroken in Asha's hand, A boy came from the reader with a message rolled in seal. It said there was movement on the Mander. It said men were building rafts where rafts had not been built since the last time the islands had reached this far north in force. It said also that in the citadel, a book had gone missing. That last was the reader's own flourish and had nothing to do with them and everything to do with him. He told them such things because he loved the knowing of them and wanted to share the taste. Asha set her chalk plainly along a line on the board and did not give in to the impulse to advance her piece too far. "We'll bite again," she said. "We'll bite and go. We'll take their rafts out from under them and make them swim. We'll leave them their horses so they can ride home shivering and complain. We'll keep watch for bells. We'll check the third notch. We'll set a child with a lantern on the cliff's edge to tell us if the wind thinks it will change. We'll do the work." Theon nodded. He lifted the mallet Ulmar had given him and felt its weight settle into his hand like a truth. He followed his sister into the day. The sea breathed in. The sea breathed out. Somewhere far off, bells rang on a ship that would never again have a lady on it. And no one turned his head to listen. They had their own sounds. They let those be enough.